Namaste and welcome to everyone joining us today, the 28th of February, 2026. My name is Sanjay Kucheria, and on behalf of the Sanatan Dharma Group, it is my privilege to welcome you to this conversation. Our collective effort here with the group is to explore Indian civilizational wisdom as a living source of insight for contemporary life, especially in areas such as leadership, ethics, and decision making. First, some housekeeping. This call is being recorded. We will have a Q&A session at the end of our talk. Audience questions can be submitted using the questions feature at the bottom of your app, of your Zoom app. Leadership today is often discussed through frameworks drawn from business schools, military strategy, or public administration. While these lenses are valuable, they're also arguably incomplete. Indian texts like the Mahabharata offer a far more complex, human, and ethically grounded understanding of power, responsibility, and inner conflict. These perspectives become especially relevant in the context of the recently launched Responsible Nation Index by India, which seeks to evaluate leadership and governance on its own terms. Our discussion today draws from this civilizational reservoir, particularly through the framework of the five seats of power, which interprets leadership through the archetypes of the Pandavas. It is an honor to be in conversation with Raghu Ananthanarayanan ji. Raghuji is a direct disciple of Yogacharya T. Krishnamacharya and his son Sri T.K.V. Desikachar, and spent over a decade in deep study of the Yoga Shastras under their guidance. He has also benefited from a long and formative association with J. Krishnamurti and Professor Pulleen Garg of IIM Ahmedabad. Raghuji is a postgraduate in engineering from IIT Madras. Professionally, he has devoted almost 4 decades to transforming organizational cultures, working across a wide spectrum that includes grassroots developmental organizations as well as large modern industrial institutions. Among the books he has authored, today we will be discussing leadership insights from his book, Five Seats of Power. The book has resonated widely with leaders, educators, and seekers who are looking for frameworks that are both rigorous and deeply rooted in Indian thought. Glad to have you here with us today, Raghuji. Let us get started. This session will be conversational in nature. We will explore how characters from our past remain deeply relevant in our daily lives, especially in the context of leadership and business. Raghuji, for the benefit of our audience, could you briefly explain or could you briefly talk about the five Pandavas of the Mahabharata and then explain the five seats of power through these Pandav archetypes? Raghuji, are you
I can hear you.
okay?
Yeah, my internet is suddenly playing up.
That is Murphy's Law in action.
Can you hear me, Sanjay
Yes.
ji?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Please, please go ahead, Raghuji.
I'll just shift the. Just give me a moment. I'll. Yeah,
Yeah, we're good.
we good?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, the question you asked me was to go into the five seats of power, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. Um, Yeah. So one of the critical things that has helped me to look at this whole framework. I was very impressed, Sanjay ji, when you talked about the application as the most critical thing, because I came to the study of the Shastras and the Yoga Sutras and the Mahabharata because I was nudged by, very strongly, more than just a nudge, by Dharampal ji, who said, if you really want to help India, go and study with a master and don't come back and tell me how great India is. Tell me what you can apply from what you've learned. So that's really what I've been doing all my life, right? And there are many, many brilliant ideas in the Yoga Sutras and in the Mahabharata. And one of them is obviously about leadership. And one of the things that I have faced very often with leaders is some of the current ideas of leadership that float around are very one-dimensional. It talks about power, it talks about control, and many ideas like this, most of which have either come from a very Euro-American militaristic context or from the colonizing context. The Indian ideas of leadership, if you look at, in the Mahabharata, they are very clearly contrasted between the Mahabharata war, the two people in the war, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. Now, one of the things you'll find in the movement of the Pandavas in the war is they look at the context very carefully and then choose the right leadership and the right formation on each of the 18 days. And there are discussions that say, why should we choose X or Y or Z? And I'm sure many people know that one of the days the person chosen is the youngest member of the team, which is Abhimanyu. Now, this contextual intelligence and making choices based on your contextual realities is a very, very important feature of Indian thought. So it talks more about leadership and preparedness for several alternatives rather than leader as a single person. And the Kaurava army is focused on one leader. And then it gets into all kinds of problems. There are ego battles within the group and things like this. So this is one very important feature of leadership. And the other critical feature is you have 5 models of power, which is what I've talked about in the book. So each of the 5 brothers, Yudhishthira, Bhima, we'll go to Nakula, Sahadeva, and then we'll come to Arjuna. Right? Now, Yudhishthira has a unique capability, and it's very interesting that each of them are depicted as masters of one or the other craft. Like Yudhishthira, for example, is the one who uses the spear and the lance. Yeah, Bhima is the one who uses the mace, and so on. So each of them have their own specific areas of external competencies and internal capabilities. Like Yudhishthira is the one who can look at law, who can look at rules, enable structure, enable certainty. And Bhima is the one who is adventurous, impulsive, passionate. Nakula is the one who is very compassionate, serves people, looks after the infrastructure. Yeah, Sahadeva is the one who is able to think. He steps back, looks at the whole thing, and he's the innovator. He's the great thinker in the group. And Arjuna is that person who asks all the very fundamental questions. And very interestingly, he goes through a period when he also has to understand his femininity. And so he's a complete person in many ways because he's explored various parts of himself. And when he comes into the battle, he asks the fundamental question, is this a dharmic war? So these are the 5 archetypal energies, because if we look at them as stereotypes, we'll get into a problem. Everyone doesn't have to be 6'5" and having a mace in the hand to have the energy of a bhima. Yeah, but these are archetypal, which means all of us have some potential for every one of these five, but we develop one or the other depending on so many circumstances and our life contexts.
Yeah. Can you, when we talk about these five archetypes or expressions of abilities, capabilities, competencies, power, uh, when we look at it from as a story, when you look at the Mahabharata as a story, we are looking at it as characters that are, for instance, in this case, characters that are born of five different, uh, I guess, individuals, for lack of a better word, each representing a certain innate disposition, a certain innate characteristics, a set of characteristics. That's what it seems to me. Uh,
Yeah.
would you then say that they are that's what that's what you are, that you're born with, or are these attributes that can be developed? And if they can be developed, what is the process or roadmap for it?
See, well, I'm using the idea of archetypes because I think we're all born with all the five propensities. But the way we are brought up enables some of them to develop and suppresses some of them. Yeah, for example, in my family,
Hmm.
in our families, the too much of a Bhima characteristic is not appreciated. We all have to be Sahadevas, you know. We have to study well and get our grades and so on and so forth. So guys like me who have a bit of a Bhima characteristic, you know, were not always appreciated to say the least.
You
So
are told
what
to suppress
happens
it.
is, yeah, so
You're told to
those
suppress it.
characteristics,
Hmm.
yeah, you're asked to suppress it or you manage around it and you find different ways of working with it. Yeah. So the first aspect of this whole process is to understand what my propensities are and which of them are developed and which of them I have not developed so far. Right? And once you have understood that, you really need to go through a process, you know, like a cricket player who has a, you know, he's an offside player or this or that. But if you have to become an all-round player, you have to go into a coaching space. You have to go into the net practice and try out the other things, which you will find you have your own way of working with them. So everybody has their ability to be orderly, to be structured. Everybody has their passion. Everybody has compassion. Everybody has the ability to think and to ask deep questions. We need to develop them and find ways of deploying them appropriately. You know, I've seen, I've done a lot of turnarounds for companies, and invariably the companies get into a problem because they had one type of leadership in the beginning that helped them to grow. And when the tide changed, when the situation changed, they didn't change the kind of leadership that was required. So you do more of the same because it was successful and then it fails. I'm seeing that with startups also. In the initial phase, you need a very strong Bhima energy to go out there to explore areas that are not explored. But if you don't understand and appreciate the Nakula, for example, who is the team builder, who enables cohesion to happen, the team gets into too much competition. So while every one of these five has a very positive side, too much of it leads to a negative. Yeah. And if an organization has to really scale up, sooner or later you need a Yudhishthira kind of an energy to structure things, to systematize things so everybody knows exactly what to do. And then you need a Sahadeva to build the knowledge systems. to find out, to really understand the theoretical parts of it, and then you keep improving it, right? And the wisdom that helps you to choose the right ones is the Arjuna ability inside you.
In businesses, let's just take the context of a family business. Uh,
Mm,
and typically in a family business, you know, the patriarch, whoever that may be, maybe it's a grandfather, father, whatever, has started the business. They've, by sheer grit, determination, intelligence, they've built it up to a certain point. Now it's time to hand the reins over. The natural, succession is my son will take over or whatever, right? That's kind of how it typically plays out. Whether the son has the right set of capabilities or not. You mentioned the startup versus a more established
mm,
organization and the need for different skill sets at each stage. How do you reconcile the desire business, for the business to remain under the, let's call it direction, jurisdiction, etc., of the family, while ensuring that you're doing justice to the business? What are the mechanisms, or what are the ways in which you can uh, ensure that those archetypes that you've talked about are fully available and represented, and particularly when it is, if you're talking about the five very accomplished Pandavas, uh,
mm.
I think the rest of us are mere mortals compared to them. So to have all of those propensities in one individual is going to be difficult, I
Yeah,
imagine. So how do you address
yeah.
that? How do you go figure that out essentially for family businesses or any business for that matter?
Very, very interesting question, Sanjay ji. I've worked with several family organizations, and what I find is the older model of leadership was what was called the karta. The karta created a context, and all the great family organizations that have survived in India had very wise kartas. Yeah, there's one organization I worked with quite a lot where the elder would choose who has to lead which of the units at what time. So if it was a turnaround situation, one of the brothers or the cousins was the kind of person who had that propensity, and they would ask him to go and lead that place. But the Karta would watch. Karta is actually behaving more like a Arjuna in the process. He is watching the whole context, understanding what's happening inside the organization, and he will modulate, right? I've seen them use X for every turnaround. And then once the turnaround happens, this person gets pulled back, right? And either a team builder or a structural person is asked to go and lead. Yeah. Now, this wisdom is very, very important to respect. And those organizations which have not had this, families which have not had this wisdom and the ability to have consensus and build it inside the families crack up. And I've seen both. So the karta usually is not the person at the front end. Yeah, but he's the one who's creating the managerial context. He's the one who's defining the leadership vision and so on.
So which
And
brings me
there's
to a
one
question.
very interesting thing.
Go ahead, please
Yeah,
go
there's
ahead.
one very interesting thing, Sanjay ji,
Hmm.
that one of the family organizations I was talking to was telling me this, that look, when we lead an organization, it's not, we have to lead it so that the next generation and the next generation can still be in the business. And that's a kind of orientation which necessitates this wisdom. They're not building to flip.
Right. I mean, I think, yeah, you have a clear vision of what you want this organization to be, and for what period of time.
Yeah.
Which brings interesting question from our audience. And this question, I'm going to say it essentially what I think what he's asking is that, when you have these five archetypes that we mentioned in a leader, or should have a leader should have, and when you're going through different stages of growth of an organization, from startup to growth to maturity and so on, and over a period of time, over years and decades. Uh, are you talking essentially about creating leadership teams that encompass all these archetypes, that bring all these archetypes together? Are you, what are we getting to here? And then, obviously, there's a follow-on question, which is how do you actually make that a reality? Say, okay, I'm going to have a leadership team that's going to have all of these components, and I'm not going to let my ego get in the way, right? But going back to is this about creating the right leadership teams in that case?
Yeah, yeah. See, the way, I've seen the most successful organizations I've seen in India, especially, most of my work has been in India. The so-called leader, yeah, has actually been a very strong Karta type, which means he has a very strong Arjuna kind of a propensity and a Nakula kind of propensity. He knows how to look at the organization and build consensus in the leadership team. And all of us know now the families are the most difficult spaces in which to build consensus. Yeah. But
Yeah.
these are people who are excellent at this. Yeah. And we have to look in terms of teams. There is the idea, this is why I contrasted the Kaurava army with the Pandava army. The Pandava army is a group of people with very different, diverse skills, but who have a heart. Their heart is in the same place. So different people are chosen to lead at different points of time. Yeah, there's a very, very interesting discussion in the Mahabharata about the last day of the war. Yeah, should Bhima lead it or should Yudhishthira lead it? So they have an argument, and then they finally go to Krishna and say, what is your answer? So Krishna listens to them and say, look, this is the last day of the war. We need somebody who knows how to lead the peace after the war. Bhima can only escalate the war. He cannot lead the peace after the war. Therefore, we need Yudhishthira to lead the day. These kinds of
Sorry,
this wisdom is phenomenal.
sorry, Raghuji, you just broke up at that moment. Can you just repeat the last 30 seconds or so?
Yeah, I was saying
Mm.
this ability, this dialogue, and the wisdom to choose the right person in the right context and to see the future and make this call is the wisdom of the person who's holding the leadership team together.
Which, since you brought up Krishna, I think you've mentioned Arjun as the as sort of the key, I guess, in this archetypes of five, and you didn't mention Arjun until now, or Krishna until now. He's somebody who doesn't hold any seat of power. He's not somebody who holds any
No,
formal position. You mentioned Karda
no.
as being more the Arjun type and Sahadev type, right? Where does
Hmm.
Krishna come into this whole picture now?
See, the
What does
way
he
I'm
represent?
looking at yeah, the way I'm looking at Krishna is not a human being. He's not a human form. He's that wisdom and the meditative core that is inside all of us. Because one of the things that keeps getting reinforced in the Mahabharata is the ability to remain in Shanta, to remain in quietude and in a meditative observational state so that you can see the outside and the inside exactly as they are. If you let your own inner uh, anger or cravings or whatever come up, you'll be clouded. So that part of you, which is the meditative core, which allows you to see clearly, is the Krishna within. And even in our tradition, no, Krishna is actually, the word Krishna actually means the color of the indigo color of the night sky when there's no moon. So he represents this infinity of wisdom.
So in a way,
So
it's
one
a
of the critical things then is for the leadership team to know how to have a meditative center and to come from there. That's a very important characteristic.
so I mean, if I were to translate it down to my level, I would say somebody who has a dispassionate attitude and an increased level of self-awareness.
Yeah,
In Would that be
yeah,
accurate?
that's accurate. And acute judgment of people. No? He's not somebody without judgment.
So there are some people who are really good judges of people, others who aren't. Um, I mean, we could look at the political context, for example, whether it is in India or elsewhere, and we can probably pick very easily. There are some people who are just excellent judges of people. They've probably
Yes,
honed it over decades, perhaps, which is why
yes,
probably you don't see as many young, very successful young political leaders as you do, you know, and we've seen some young ones, for example, from Europe, who shot to prominence and then flamed out. But then you see some of the older ones who've really been out there in the field, understanding people, understanding situations, understanding society, and develop that capability. Would you say that in a business context, that anybody that's growing up, but I'm just using family business, it could apply to entrepreneurs as well, or people who are leading organizations as hired guns, CEOs of companies. How would they build that capability, that ability to function in that way without necessarily saying, okay, I'm going to go spend decades and I'm going to try and figure out how to judge people and I'm going to try and
one of the things, critical things, is how you define yourself, how you define success. Like almost all the family kartas I've met, they define success by saying, how do I remain in business? And this, how do I remain in business, is not a time bound thing. They say, this is who we are. We are a business family. We have to remain in business forever. That's their thinking. So the way they build their reputation, they build the trustworthiness in the market. And several things like this is quite amazing. And that's because they have a very long vision, right? It's actually an endless, continuous vision. Yeah. And within that, there are families which have, maintained their business for hundreds of years. Yeah. So it's not a short-term thing that they're talking about. They're talking about very high adaptability, very acute understanding of what the trends are. Many of them know how to have friends in influential places. They have several capabilities. And most of the Indian businesses, if you see, it's the trustworthiness that allows them to build several very varied organizations under them. Yeah, because the banks trust them, the state trusts them. So that's one of the things that they have built very strongly. Yeah, the Tatas, for example, they're in all kinds of businesses. So obviously, it's not the competence of the leader to understand a particular business area that's keeping the Tatas going. Yeah, it's a very interesting ability to hold the whole and to draw the right people who trust them. Yeah, when this ability erodes, then the friction always starts developing inside, and that's a very costly thing.
can I let me
Whereas
shift.
when I'm working,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
no, when I'm working with startups, when I'm working with younger groups of people, they have, I first ask them about this. Now, what's your definition of success? And many of them have a 4-year, 5-year horizon. And they're not really thinking beyond that. But even in that 4-5 year horizon, you need a good understanding of these 5 capabilities, though one of them might be leading. For example, the Bima capability is very critical, like I said. While that leads, if I forget about team building, if I forget about structuring, then I'm constantly scrambling once the success has been reached. So even here, groups that I've worked with, young people I've worked with who have this wisdom, and many young people do have this wisdom. They have a sense of, how to build teams, how to attract people. Some of them are very charismatic chaps. So these 5 to me are critical.
Got it. So, again, for a follow-up question to how to when you build organizations and you have a certain strong propensity in one area, or you have one strong propensity, where you have that. If you don't have that team, you talked about team building, or the ability to build teams. If you don't have that, then is the way to basically say, okay, I'm going to go find somebody who can help me do this. Maybe it's a co-founder, maybe it's a
Yeah.
really strong people leader, etc. Is that the way for me to do this? Because I'm the beam personality. I want to get stuff done. I want to grow this organization. I've got this amazing, brilliant idea, and so on. Is that the way for me? Is that the way forward versus trying to, fix something that is not, that can be fixed, and I don't have it basically, right?
Hmm.
Is that the
See,
way?
what I'm advising, I've had this question come up uh, to me. What I'm advising people to do is to look at 2 distinct types of people. Yeah, there are one set of people who like to invest and build, and they are interested in institution building and organization building. There are another type of people who are very, very capable in certain aspects and who are quite happy coming into an organization, making a deal, saying 5 years, 3 years, I'll be here. Tell me what my goals are. I'll meet these goals. Pay me so much for this goal. And after those 3-5 years, they want to leave. Today, we have to build organizations that have the capability of retaining the core of institution builders so that your values are intact. And you also know how to deal with these people whom I'm calling the bargainers. No? They're very competent. They know their value. They'll deliver something for you. You don't need them beyond that point. And they don't want to stay. So this, I think, is the new design that we have to work out for organizations.
I want to just switch.
Even family organizations need to do that.
Right. I want to just switch. Let's take one of the big behemoths, Microsoft. 50 years in
Hmm.
existence. Three
Hmm.
CEOs, three leaders, basically. Bill Gates, Palmer, and now Nadella. Uh,
Hmm.
in the context of organizations to be around for 50 years in a fairly dynamic industry, and to
Hmm.
have, they took their lumps along the way, but they've done remarkably well. How would
Yes.
you explain in the context of this 5 archetypes, and the way you design your organization and the leadership? How would you explain this kind of success with these three individuals?
If I understand it right, yeah, because we're looking at it from the outside. I don't have too much of an inside view
Right, purely
of
as a,
Microsoft.
Mhm.
Yeah. See, I think the initial team that was successful was Barma and Steve and this guy. Yeah, the two of them
Paul Allen.
together,
Paul Allen, yeah.
Paul Allen. Yeah, these were the initial team now who created the success, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And see what happened when Bill Gates stepped down and Steve Ballmer stepped up. He was the rah-rah guy, and the organization didn't respond well. Yeah, under Nadella, he really defined a very inclusive leadership style. Some of his early mails that all of us must have read about. He shares his own life space. He talks about what it means to build a group. I'm sure that was the time when there was a lot of friction inside the company, and the board took a wise decision saying that we need a person who can build the institution back again. Yeah, and he's very successfully managed that. If they hadn't, they'd have gone down.
Sure. Leadership is often discussed in the context of military, business, government, right? I mean, that's your typical uh,
Yeah,
prism through which you look at everything from a lead, as far as leadership goes. What does leadership look like in this context of the archetypes and so on? What does leadership look like at the grassroots level, whether it is within families, your local communities, your schools? What does that look like?
it's no different actually, Sanjay ji. I've done a lot of work with grassroots organizations, yeah, with craft development groups and things like that. It's almost exactly the same. That's why I developed this whole idea of archetypal ways of looking at it and not really looking at the external. See, if I'm working, I worked with the craft group that was working on the Kalamkari art, for example.
Mhm.
Yeah, you had a central family which was holding the knowledge, and where the father had taught the art to a number of people. And then in that team, there were two different types of people. There were weaver families who were traditionally weavers, and then there were newer people who had come in. So there was a lot of problem, and the core of the art was being lost because people were using bad dyes and things like that. So I worked with a team to work there, and again, you could see the wisdom of the old man, how he chose people to go out and sell, how he chose people who would work with the conflict inside, and so on. The newer people who came in who didn't understand this actually were creating a problem for the whole art, because the art lives on its quality. The art lives on a long term perception people have of the art. Yeah. And we had to work very hard to help the younger, newer people to understand what it means to have a team and not for each one to start pushing their point of view. I don't see any difference. The context is different, the numbers might look different, but leadership is a combination of all these five capabilities.
But it seems to me that you need that karta individual essentially, to really shepherd an organization, shepherd the different propensities at different points in time for different functions or different tasks. That seems to be a pretty critical role for
Yeah,
any organization.
yeah, it is. It is. See, unfortunately, today the focus on competencies is very high, and there isn't enough studying and understanding of the inner capabilities when you're looking at competencies. You can see, Sanjayji, when you have organizations where they bring in somebody for competence, and he's not a values fit, or he's not a good fit in these terms,
Hmm.
the organization goes through a huge amount of turmoil. Yeah, we've seen it with some leaders in India where they brought in people from the outside, whereas it was a very strongly ingrown organization and they paid a price. So this is critical. The studying this is coming back because I'm seeing a few papers now talking about the feminine aspects of management and things like that, which is largely a term used to understand the human being rather than just the competence.
Can you explain that a little bit?
See, the one of the key ideas in the Indic thought has always been the knower or the doer is central, not just the competency, not just the doing. Like, for example, we'll go back to Mahabharata, yeah? You take Duryodhana and you take Bhima. They're equally capable. They have the same teacher. Balrama is taught both of them. Yeah, both of them wield the gada, the
The
mace.
mace, yeah.
What's the difference between these two? Yeah. While Bhima is part of a very, very wise leadership team, Duryodhana refuses to be part of the team.
He wants to be the
And
leader. He wants to be the de
he wants to
facto
be, yeah, the sole guy. Yeah.
old guy. Yeah.
He wants to be the sole guy and he wants things for himself. And finally, he makes choices not based on a contextually wise thing, but on what he wants. Yeah, the world is not going to, you're like King Canute's story. No? You can't tell the waves to stop coming. You have to understand the waves and behave in a way that is meaningful with the world, which Duryodhana refuses to do. And this is an extreme case, but quite often leaders get stuck with one point of view or this or that. And they then create a problem because there are other people who see the world differently. So this ability, what's now called the feminine ability to have a dialogic space and to understand before you go in, is very important.
For
It's
somebody
really
like,
like there are two parts to the organization. Nah?
Mhm.
There's one part which is the shut up and shoot part. Yeah, you're in the front lines. Don't ask too many questions. You know who the enemy is. Just shut up and shoot. But just shut up and shoot for too long will not work. You have to come back. You have to sharpen your tools. You have to ask the right strategic questions. You have to ask, am I fighting the right war? Yeah, you have to heal people. There are so many other things that have to happen inside the camp space and around the campfire. Yeah, the campfire is always a round space. The shut up and shoot space is always a an arrowhead.
yeah.
And
You know,
it's very, very critical to toggle between these two.
um, I want to go to a couple of these archetypes, or I should say characters in this case. Yudhishthir is he's deeply committed to dharma, right? He's Dharmaraj, and
Correct.
and maybe because of that, or or perhaps because of that, he struggles with decision making.
Correct.
And in the modern context, we say you have to you operate in the gray zone. There's no black or white, right? There's no black and
That's
white.
right.
There's a gray zone.
That's right.
At what point, what does his journey, Yudhishthir's journey, reveal about the limits of moral clarity in leadership?
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
I think so. Because there are certain situations, like I told you in the last day's discussion, nah? After the war, you have to stabilize, you have to create peace. So who's the right guy? But before the war starts, the most important character is Arjuna. And the entire dialogue is with Arjuna, who asks all the fundamental questions. Why am I fighting? Is this the right battle or not? Should I be fighting? Should I not be fighting? All these very fundamental questions are asked. Once those questions are answered, you focus on what you have to do and go for it. Right? So there are different times when different things will come up to the fore. Yeah. So this is a critical aspect of the whole leadership process. And Yudhishthira has to learn when to step back and not keep saying. Now, see, if you look at Kauruva's thing, Bhishma never steps back. He insists that he must be the top guy all the time. And Karna walks out. Yeah. So there are this kind of a thing that says that one person is the leader and he will hold the fort all the time is not a good model in times of uncertainty. It's a very good model when the outside is not changing fast,
But
when the
would you say
technology is
that?
not changing fast.
But how would that work in practical terms when let's take Nadella as CEO of Microsoft. I mean, for lack of a better example, I mean, that's a great example, I think, where it's gone. Microsoft as a company has gone through a lot of change over the last
Yeah,
15 years or so. Tremendous
yeah,
transformation and a tremendous success
yeah,
under his leadership. If
yeah.
what would you explain in terms of in terms of this prism that we've been having this discussion through? What would you say is the explanation for that success with the same individual leading the organization? What was it that you think contributed? Or if you want to pick another example in the Indian context of
So we
somebody.
look at this one. We look at this one.
Mm,
My understanding of Nadella is he has a very high Nakula ability, which he's written about. I think he's a very high Sahadeva. He knows his technology like the back of his hand. And he's using these two abilities critically to manage the scene. Because the Sahadeva ability helps you to really look into the future and things like that. That's how it's described in the Mahabharata also. Na?
you're right.
He's the one with the vision of the future. Plus a very acute and very high understanding of technology and knowledge. That's the Sahadeva ability. I think anybody who's leading an IT company today has to have these two. Yeah, it's, the Arjuna ability may be important from time to time. It's not critical in managing over a period of time. So once you've chosen a business to be in, once you've chosen a broad direction and what kind of values you want to build, some of the others have to come to the fore. And this is my understanding of Nadella.
Got it. Thank you. Um, I guess if for young leaders, who are starting out, whether it is whether it's a startup they're leading or they're stepping into a leadership role in a family business, or they've been picked to run an organization, uh, how would they begin working with this framework? What kind of inner discipline should precede external application? What kind of preparation should they be thinking of doing to ensure that they'll be able to lead the organization successfully over long periods of time?
See, these are two very different contexts, Sanjayji. We'll look at the
Mhm.
familial context first and then go to the
Yeah,
startup. See, my advice to younger people in any family context has been to sit with their elders and listen to all the stories. Yeah, there is a huge amount of wisdom, and quite often, what I've seen is that the kartas, if you go and ask them, they actually don't know how to articulate, or they will articulate it in their own ways. Yeah, but if you ask them to tell the stories, yeah, what were the turning points, what happened, and the more deep the storytelling is, the more the young people can gain wisdom, which is impossible to transfer otherwise. Because if you're running a family business, you must have a deep understanding of the history of the family, the values that the family has stood for, and all the vicissitudes that the family has been through. Yeah, this is a very, very critical thing, right? And there has to be a great respect for the way the family has managed itself till now. Yeah, I've seen one or two families where the youngsters have, created a problem. That's because they haven't respected the fact of all the difficulties that have been gone through in that family so far to come to where they are. Yeah. Now, where they are, if you look at it from, some very fashionable point of view, you can point out 10 holes in it. But the ability to stay there and what is, generally called the founder's mindset, na,
mm,
to really understand that and to have developed that love for the organization is central. And when you listen to these stories, you understand the inner capabilities required. And like we said before, no, the outer, if you don't have it in the family, can always be bought. Yeah.
right.
And very often I found that these kartas also have a very interesting way of figuring out which of the children in the family are capable of what because they watched them from the time they were very young.
Right.
And I've had very, very lovely conversations with some of them. And the way they talk about, this guy did this when he was young. I always knew he was like this, things like this. And they'll tell you stories. Okay. And that is something that I think is invaluable, right? And I also think that any young person today going into business must have, what's called the T-type capability. Na? You must be really proficient in the key technology that the organization is employing. That's very, very critical. But you must have all these five at the psychological level. You should know which one to use when, but you must have a very deep understanding of the technology.
That's a
And
wonderful.
even business acumen, the money part of it, depending on which kind of business you're in, the money part of it can also be figured out, but the real deep technology cannot be figured out so easily. And it's not just a question of putting two bolts together, because one of the organizations I was working with, they shifted their factory from place A to place B. They thought they were very smart because there were some union problems here, and they made sure they had the detailed, SOPs and everything done. When they started the new factory, it wouldn't run because there are so many things you can't put down in the standard operating procedure.
Sure.
And they needed to bring some of the old people back again and get the younger ones to be taught, so on and so forth. So these are the two critical things I would think. Na?
Sure. This is wonderful. Thank you, Raghuji. I mean, your reflections bring us to a very deep understanding of leadership. Uh, I think this conversation reminds us that some of the most powerful forms of leadership are often unseen, and yet
Absolutely.
they shape outcomes, they shape values, and futures in very profound ways. I want to open up the session to audience questions. We've been taking a couple of them along the way, but when it made sense to do so. But I'd love to open it up to audience questions. If you have any questions, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom app, and I'll pick it up from there. While we're waiting for that, if you can just take a minute or so, just to tell us what you've been working on recently, what kinds of new initiatives or programs you're engaged with or involved with, that might be beneficial to us. Can you please share some of that?
Yeah, what I'm focusing on right now, Sanjay ji, is looking into the Yoga Sutras as a very central piece because I'm finding that understanding the mind, understanding the psyche is so central to leadership. And when you have an idea of psychology which is not culturally relevant, it creates huge problems. Like some of the problems I was telling you about between the younger people and the older people comes from some very fundamental differences. Like, for example, in the Indian languages, you don't have an idea of a separate individual. In all our languages, we would use a word like vyakti. Yeah. Now, the word vyakti comes from avyakta, vyakta. No, there is a shared ground out of which a person comes in. So there's a familial context, and a person who is, one unique representative of that family. Now, if you understand some of these nuances, then the way we understand the psyche is very different. And we are oriented as Indians, for example, towards being much more consensus building. We have a strong Nakula tendency in us. But a lot of people who end up studying Western modes, yeah, end up with an idea of a Bhima as the strong leader. And
And
these kinds of differences are not trivial.
I think the key is, I guess, to recognize these differences and to be able to integrate them in a way. And actually, that brings me to this
Exactly.
question. from one of our audience members. Uh, what she's asking is, and this is the question I'm quoting it, are we saying a CFO or a CMO or a CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, shouldn't
Yeah,
be the CEO as the five strengths are very different in terms of progression, promotion, etc.?
it depends, yeah, because I've seen, see, to me, the understanding of a team is like the understanding of a play. Yeah. Now, really very, very well made theater pieces. Every player who is out there on the stage deeply understands every other role. And then they present a whole. It's like an ensemble. It's like a
Hmm.
music ensemble. Now, just because I'm playing the violin, if I don't understand the trombone and where that comes in and how it blends with me, I cannot be part of the orchestra. And leadership teams are a mixture of jazz and orchestral music, right?
Interesting.
I really have to understand every player. So if that's a stable team where a CFO or whoever has been leading and really being part of the leadership team, I'm sure they'd have imbibed all the other capabilities. You don't have to have expertise in every one of them, but you have to know how to dialogue with every one of them and understand how to bring a consensus. And I've also seen teams break up when people with one propensity and one capability become the CEO and they don't know how to listen to the others. So it's really like a theatrical performance at one level, like an orchestral performance at one level.
So I guess to answer this question, then it would be really all about having that self-awareness of where your strengths lie and how do you integrate those other capabilities that you need
Absolutely.
to become. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. This has been a great conversation. We are just 2 minutes away from the end of our time today. I'm very thankful to you, Raghuji, for giving us sharing your time with us, you sharing your wisdom with us. And on behalf of the Sanatan Group, I'm really appreciative of that. Thanks to everyone who joined us for this conversation. A recording of this call will be available within the next 48 hours. Our next session is titled Dissolving Caste Consciousness. And our panelist is going to be, our speaker is going to be Pandit Satish Sharma. This will be held on February 5th at 7 a.m. PST, 8:30 p.m. IST. Drawing from the Upanishads, the talk will examine the original meanings of Varna and Jati and the colonial origins of the modern idea of caste. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. Raghuji, again, appreciate your participation today. We would love to,
Thank you.
if you can share your information, contact information for anybody who wants to get in touch with you, please,
Sure.
what's the best way to connect with you?
Uh, Ideal is to email me, I guess. Should I put my email in the chat?
Yeah, or you can just, put in the chat and also say it aloud if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's Raghu, Raghu,
Mm-hmm.
dot T for Tamil Nadu, A for Andhra, O for Orissa, TAO
Tao.
at gmail.com.
Okay. Raghu.tao@gmail.com. Got it.
Yeah, that's
Wonderful.
the
Uh,
number.
so actually, if you don't mind, we got one question that has come in. I'd love for you to
Yeah,
take this, even though we are at the hour.
sure, sure.
What what are or should be the motivations of a karta? Because you talked about that role a lot.
I do, I use the word dharma, which, yeah, that's the main difference between the Kaurava and the Pandava army, right? So, dharma, I don't mean law or religion or any such thing. The Mahabharata defines dharma in a very beautiful way. It says actions which enliven me, enliven my immediate context and the world I live in is what is dharma. And it comes from the root meaning of the word, of dharma, dharati iti dharma, that which upholds. And if you look at the definitions of Raja Dharma and so on that are discussed in the Mahabharata, one of the things that has struck me is every blade of grass that is under the jurisdiction of the Raja has to flourish. I think this is a beautiful understanding of the word dharma. And when I was talking about the Kartas, who say that this family has to remain in business, all of them have a huge focus on investing in education, investing in the context, and so on. So they don't look at business as just thriving for themselves. They definitely look at the whole context that they're living in, the social context they're living in, and so on. So that to me is very critical. I guess especially today, uh, we have to re-understand and re-establish dharma. Otherwise, we may not have a world in which to do business for too long.
Yes, and on that happy note, thank you, Raghuji. Appreciate your time today. And we look forward to engaging with you again in a future event.
Sure,
Namaste, everyone.
sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed your questions, Sanjay ji. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.